As the next speaker, we will now hear Claudio Giudici from the Italian Taxi Union. And I must say that I think it fits also very well in respect to what Helga just said about classical culture and human civilization, because content and the basis for the sovereign nation state was developed by Cusa also. And now Claudio, he's coming from a city where this has been embodied, namely the city of Florence in Italy. So Claudio, greetings, and we are very happy that you are here. Please start.
Grazie. Buongiorno a tutti.
Good morning to everyone. Thank you. I thank the Schiller Institute for this opportunity. I will speak in Italian, so I will try to follow the speech as much as possible. I think it's important, considering what we risk facing in this period, I think it's important to tell you what has happened with the Italian taxi drivers over the past 3 years. And in general, the experience of the workers and citizens who in Italy in the last 3 years have opposed the new Monti government. We are faced with a clash between the world of speculation and work. This is a first important idea which we can look at if we wanted to identify the causes of the crisis. If we want to face what we have in front of us with optimism. I want to read a few words from Mahatma Gandhi, which I think can give us some courage to deal with the situation we have to face. Gandhi said, "I dedicate this message to those who are crazy, to all those who see things differently. You can quote them, disagree with them, you can glorify or denigrate them, but the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they are able to change things. And while some might call them crazy, I see their genius, because only those who are crazy enough to think they can change the world really change it." I think these words are very important. They can help us in a difficult situation when we feel that we're a little bit outside of the opinions, the dominant opinion in society, which right now I think general public opinion is based on lies in this historic period. So I said we're in a phase of history where we have a clash between financial speculation and work, between empires and states, between those who have a pessimistic view of human nature, a Hobbesian view, where you have certain people who think they're illuminated, think that they can manage the population and the world with an anti-Promethean worldview. And on the other hand, we have an optimistic view of human nature, those who think that essentially we can use the cognitive and creative abilities of every individual in the human race to improve our planet. This clash has been going on for centuries, of course, for millennia, from our Judeo-Christian tradition from the 13th century before Christ to Socrates and Plato, St. Augustine, the Florentine Renaissance, Leibniz, Schiller, all the way up to Martin Luther King and Lyndon LaRouche today. People who tell us that we can and should be optimistic about the human race. In Italy, the process that Lyndon LaRouche has described for decades has become evident. Speculative processes and predatory processes are taking over people's lives, the nation, our democracy, the economy. In the encyclical Quadragesimus Annus, Pius XI describes this process. He speaks of the pretext of free competition as an instrument to allow certain oligarchies to control entire markets and then politics too. And finally, to create a conflict between states. If we think of this, we are seeing a phase of exactly this type right now, the things that Helga was telling us before, the potential danger, the imminent danger of a third world war, tell us that we have this type of process. We're seeing this type of process. In Italy, as you may know, the elected government was deposed by a series of speculative attacks, which allowed the financial oligarchy essentially to put in the government a figure of the oligarchy, the financial oligarchy, both as the head of the government and of certain important ministries. Now we know, we've said it for a long time, we said this in 1992 with what was called the Britannia Operation, this agreement taken on the royal yacht, Queen Elizabeth's royal yacht Britannia in 1992. In June 1992, near Civitavecchia in Italy, the decision was made to launch a large financial market in Italy to sell off Italian state industries. And so now we have a small group of national, international financial interests which control the Italian economy. We know that in this operation, George Soros played an important role on behalf of the British Empire. Today, for the second phase of the Britannia, George Soros hasn't been mentioned. So the Monti government has come. The previous government was resisting. The previous government did not want to carry out this plan of privatization and deregulation. This is what those type of policies were what Friedrich List called kicking the ladder. Kicking away the ladder, the system that would eliminate any rules in the market, take over a market and then kick away the ladder, meaning not allowing anyone else to get into the market. So this is already going on in various parts of Europe and around the world. In Japan, for example, after 4 years of radical deregulation, they closed the market again after the oligopolies had taken over important sectors of the economy. This is the process described by List. So currently, we don't know if Soros has had an important role in this speculative attack against Italy, against Italian public finances. And certainly the Inter-Alpha banking group is behind this too. The Intesa San Paolo Bank in Italy is part of this group. The former CEO of this bank, Corrado Passera, is now at the head of the Ministry of Economic Development and Infrastructure in Italy. It's probably just a coincidence, right? But we don't believe in fairy tales. We know that behind all this, there is the British Empire, which is carrying out a strategy for the destruction of nation states and reduction of the global population. So therefore, what we can see, the winds of war coming from Syria, from Iran, which are obviously part of a broader conflict that would end up involving Russia and China, makes it clear that the Malthusian design of Prince Philip of Edinburgh could be fulfilled very quickly. However, we should be optimistic, I think, very optimistic, because if we understand the process and we know the solutions that have been already carried out in history by others, people who have succeeded in carrying out these solutions, such as Franklin Roosevelt, then we should be optimistic. In Italy, with the announcement of the initial measures to be taken by the Monti government, a mass strike process broke out, which we had already begun to see in various areas of the Western world, and in Northern Africa led to the fall of governments, although there was no strategic positive solution and perspective for the population there. The situation was no longer sustainable, but there was not a plan and a project to actually improve the situation. So with the Grow Italy decree, this is a decree from the Monti government, not a normal law that goes through the normal constitutional process, but a decree. This is based on liberalization, deregulation, radical deregulation of all the markets in Italy. Markets, even markets that had already been deregulated, but obviously it's not enough. Monti tried to transfer entire sectors of the Italian economy to the financial oligarchy, which he represents. This process currently has come up against resistance. And I think we have to talk about resistance, true resistance, which is different than what the Financial Times wrote, which provoked a bit of ire in me. The Financial Times spoke about resistance from corporations, bad corporations. But the reality is this is resistance from the labor force, from people who work, taxi drivers, newsstand owners, mechanics, lawyers, pharmacy owners, any professionals, shopkeepers. These people resisted. Now, what the Monti government is now planning to do to eliminate something called Article 18 in the Italian Constitution, which defends people from being fired from their jobs without just cause. This is the next measure in the sights of the Monti government. And there might be even more resistance to this. So these workers, these citizens, became active to resist. And they started to pressure the institutions. Fortunately, we still have a democracy. Well, the government is no longer democratic. Yet, we have a parliament, elected representatives. And citizens can pressure these people because they have to be elected. They will have to be re-elected if they want to be. So these parliamentarians, though, don't react very well to this democratic pressure. They say things which are ridiculous, which offend people, which offend the dignity of citizens. Just as 90% of the citizens do not know the risk that humanity is facing now of war, the same amount of people in the population also don't recognize the reality of the economic situation, because they hear from the media, from the parliament, from all sorts of outlets, they hear not the truth about what's going on. So in Italy, the process, the free market, liberalization, privatization processes have already caused great damage in the past. We saw this with the deregulation of shops, small shops in '98, the retail sector. Real estate, for real estate brokerage in 1992. This is interesting because I was only 16 years old, but I remember that this category of workers, real estate agents, maybe they're privileged in a certain sense. There were about 1,000 agents, and they were stigmatized. They were called a caste, a lobby. Now, there was a reform of the financial system, and now, the real estate market and the real estate brokerage. And now that sector is controlled by 20 banks, which are in turn controlled by 2 large banks. So instead of 1,000 smaller agents, now we have 2 big banks that control everything. So that's liberalization for you. 2 big banks control all real estate transactions essentially in Italy. Then there was the deregulation of the truck drivers, of road haulage in the 1980s. Now we have mostly foreigners from outside the European Union. They're employees of large companies. They work long hours, very long hours. They drive a lot. And very often, I don't think this is a stereotype because my brother actually worked together with them, they are often drunk. This is also a result of this deregulation. So what I want to say here is that these so-called liberalizations actually lead to a concentration of sectors under just a few powerful groups. It lowers the level. It lowers the level of working conditions and the quality of the economic process. So this is why when I read in the pages of the Financial Times, when I read this about this resistance of the corporations, there was a title saying that taxi drivers are crippling Monti when Bill Gates wasn't able to do that because Monti ran the big case against Microsoft, the antitrust case against Microsoft. So they said he took down Bill Gates, but he can't take down the taxi drivers. So I decided to write a letter to the Financial Times, which was published, fortunately. The Financial Times published this letter, and this had a certain amount of resonance in Italy next week, and it's still going on. I'll be interviewed by Canadian television next week, for example. I've been interviewed by many others. So what did I say in this letter? I said that this isn't a resistance of corporations, meaning small groups of closed workers. Well, this is resistance against parasites. This is resistance against financial interests which are attempting to find new assets, frantically seeking new assets for the financial markets due to the financial crisis that broke out in 2007. So the government, in order to carry out its plan of radical liberalization of these economic sectors, launched a campaign of mystification against these workers based on lies. There was propaganda, a media propaganda campaign against us. We were ostracized, kept out of all the talk shows that talked about taxi drivers or pharmacists or newsstand owners or shopkeepers. There were entire shows for hours and hours, 2-3 hours, and there were no representatives of the actual workers. They were talking about us, and no one actually was able to say anything. So there's about 60,000 taxi drivers in Italy. So I had the idea of creating a parallel information system. I said there's a lot of us. We can leaflet. We can create pressure by word of mouth. We use social networks, which have been used for revolution in North Africa. We can use this for our Operation Truth. We called it Operation Truth. And I got full support from the national leader of the union, the taxi union, which I represent in Tuscany. His name is Bittarelli. He gave me carte blanche to move forward with this operation, and he's been on television a lot recently also, to try to point out the reality of the situation in the media to the people. Now here, maybe this can be an example. Maybe in this room, we know this. We know these things. These issues are questions that are not difficult, but a lot of people, obviously the rest of the population, it's different. I was talking to a gas station owner in Florence, and he was saying, we've lost everything. He said the Monti government has put back commissions on ATM transactions or credit card transactions. You know that on 50 euros of gasoline in Italy, there's only about €1 gross goes to the owner of the gas station. The maximum 140. The rest is all taxes or the raw material. And actually the guy now says we only get 75 cents out of 50 euros of gas. And now the government wants to put a commission Now let's say you have to pay a commission to the banks when someone pays with a credit card. The previous government had taken this, removed this commission, this cost, this fee. What's the point for putting this fee back on? It's just money given to the banks. Does it help the economy? So I asked them, well, why didn't you resist? Why didn't you protest? No one knows about this. And he said, well, our representatives agree with what's been done, and I'm not going to renew my union membership. So many categories of workers have not succeeded or did not decide to resist, just as I was saying with the 1980s with the truck drivers or the shopkeepers in the 90s. Obviously, this is in Italy, of course. In the taxi sector, in Ireland, for example, in Ireland, they didn't resist. In Greece, they are resisting, and they're currently resisting the radical deregulation of their sector. Also in France, there's a great deal of resistance. So we need to create campaigns, propaganda, information campaigns to combat the propaganda from the other side. So this is what we did. Leaflets, just talking to people, social networks. And at a certain point, they could no longer keep us out of the media. And we were lucky. I think we were lucky. Although I don't believe in luck, but the fact that my letter was published in the Financial Times helped a great deal. So we ended up on the main television stations, shows in Italy. So I and others were able to say the reality about what the rates are in Italy, what's the quality of Italian the taxi system, which is excellent. It's very high quality. Obviously, there are certain situations which could be criticized in the south of Italy, for example. But there are a lot of things that don't work in southern Italy, not just taxis. It's a general problem. It could be a bridge for development towards all of Africa. And this is why development is being blocked, because that's the British plan is to block development of Italy and southern Italy, to stop this bridge for development. So we created this parallel information system, this Operation Truth. But once we got into the mass media, then we raised the stakes. We started to talk about GlassSteagall. We talked about Lyndon LaRouche. We openly criticized Adam Smith and the free trade system, saying we need more Franklin Roosevelt. And this created a certain process which gave courage to others, people in higher positions in Italian politics, such as Giulio Tremonti, for example. When I was in this important Italian talk show conducted by a man named Michele Santoro, he has the highest viewership in Italy, I said that what little I know of economics I learned from an American economist named Lyndon LaRouche. And shortly after that, I mentioned that LaRouche had been interviewed by Minoli, a journalist, in 2003. A week later, this was shown on national television again. So this is an effect. 2 weeks later, Giulio Tremonti went back to this same show to talk about GlassSteagall, to talk about Franklin Roosevelt. So a process was begun. And today, the Italian population is more conscious of the true causes of the crisis. Not enough, of course, but we certainly contributed to this change. Think that taxi drivers are not seen in a positive light in Italy, because there's a great deal of disinformation about our sector, because because the large financial interest and industrial interest want to take over our sector. They're looking for a new market to take over. And so they find it easy to spread disinformation about this sector. You know, taxis are used by maybe 2% of the population. 98% of the population has no idea what the deal is, what's going on with taxis. So out of the 2% of the population that actually uses taxis, 90% is perfectly satisfied with the taxi service. But if we take people who don't use taxis, you know, at the beginning of the media campaign against us, 98% of the Italians were against Italians, were against the taxis, of course, even though they never take them. So we stopped certain things, certain measures, but between now and Tuesday, the final decision is supposed to be taken. Is supposed to be taken on these measures. We're at the 80th minute of a soccer game, and we're winning right now, maybe 3-0 or 4-0. But in the last 2 minutes, anything could happen. So I try to be cautiously optimistic, knowing that things can change quickly. So we succeeded in this campaign, this information campaign, to change this public opinion from 98% people against us to 65% against us. That's, you know, that's not bad considering the bombardment of false information from the mass media. And I say often, you know, we're on the side of truth. Even though we're weaker, truth is stronger than lies. Excuse me if I've gone on too long. I'll come to my conclusion now. I was saying that today the Italian population is more conscious of the situation. And we have a possibility, great possibility, to transform this year 2012, this prophecy, this prophecy of the Mayas about the end of the world. I think we can transfer this into an occasion for development, actually, for all of humanity. Transfer this year, a new renaissance. Not only a Florentine renaissance, Florence is my city, but but I think this battle goes through GlassSteagall. If we're able to reintroduce this principle of separation between commercial banks and investment banks, then we will also be able to remove the conditions that push towards the war danger, the pretext for provocative actions taken by the West in certain areas of the world, such as Iran, Syria. I think that the true cause of this push for war is based on this economic crisis. So if we can succeed in forcing the adoption of GlassSteagall, then I think this would be very important. In Italy, last week, now maybe it's almost 2 weeks, in the Senate, Senator Oscar Peterlini introduced a law with the contribution of the General Secretary of Movisol, Andrew Spanis. We succeeded in presenting this bill to reintroduce GlassSteagall. And now there's discussion of doing it in the Chamber of Deputies also. So if Italy, I know in other places in the world, including the United States, there's also a similar campaign and discussion. In Italy, I believe that from this standpoint, very good work has been done. And if we succeed in reintroducing this principle, there could be a positive escalation of the situation to actually change the conditions for humanity, to create a phase of cooperation, because we will send a message. Besides a concrete action, we would also create an important message for humanity, saying that the speculative processes are not legitimate. Speculative processes cannot dominate work, the real economy, production. For the last 40 years, that's been the direction. That's been the direction. So, just to conclude, I want to cite some words of Franklin Roosevelt, the day before his death, words which I think will help us for our mental processes, to put us on the right path. He wrote, "The only limit to our realization of tomorrow will be our doubts of today. Let us move forward with strong and active faith." Thank you.